immigration has become an increasingly important, obviously you know, with all the immigrants, potential immigrants all over the world who want to come here. Phil has primarily worked with immigrants who come through South America, actually Central America. And when he was here 5 years ago in 2011, that was his main topic. He'll probably talk about that too, but I hope that he will throw in, Phil, if you wouldn't mind, a few words about the present situation with immigration from the Middle East. Anyway, without any further ado, Phil, you're on.
My name is Philip Burns. I'm an attorney in private practice in Stamford. I practice family immigration law, which means I do not do deportation cases, and I also do not do business immigration law, which means I do not bring in Volkswagen executives, I do not bring in Toyota engineers, etc. I do the landscapers, I do the nannies, I do the restaurant cooks, I do regular folks, and try to get them green cards, try to get them work permits, try to get them citizenship, try to reunite their families that have in many cases been separated for 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, try to legalize them. And I'm going to be explaining towards the end of the talk why that is, in most cases, impossible. So I want to start off, I guess I should also mention, in a prior life, one of the reasons I got into immigration law, which, by the way, is not very remunerative, and therefore I do personal injury law, which is how I subsidize what I love doing, the immigration law. Therefore, I do auto accidents and slip and fall and the rest of it, which lets me do the immigration law, which I love doing. And the way I got into immigration law was having been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador. I got to learn Spanish, obviously, and learn the culture and appreciate it. And then I was also transferred to Haiti, where I learned Haitian Creole and learned to appreciate the Haitian people and culture. And when I came back and opened up my own practice with the intention to not practice immigration law, I had taken a class in immigration law at the suggestion of some attorneys who knew about my language abilities and decided I did not want to do immigration law. When I opened up my own office, all the calls that I started getting when word got out that there was a Haitian Creole speaking attorney and Spanish speaking attorney were all about immigration law. So my kids were starting to get hungry because I wasn't getting other calls and I didn't want to do immigration. So I decided this is what I had to do. So let's start out with a little bit of true-false. Being in the United States without permission is a crime. True or false? Being in the United States is a crime. True? False? Okay, a lot of people aren't raising your hands, so let's just practice. Everybody raise your hand. Okay, let's just a little bit of practice here. Okay. Being in the United States without permission is a crime. Okay? Is not a crime. All right? Well, let me give you a hint. Being here without permission is a violation of United States federal law. So let's try it again. Being here without permission is a crime. True? False. All right? Working here without permission is a crime. True? False? All right, great. All right. Undocumented immigrants, what people like to call illegal immigrants. I don't care for that term because being here without permission is a violation of federal law, as I just told you. But also parking where you're not supposed to is a violation of local law. That doesn't make you an illegal person. All right, so they're in violation of the law. The violation is they are undocumented, so I prefer the term undocumented immigrants. So undocumented immigrants pay taxes or don't pay taxes? Pay taxes? Don't pay taxes. All right, very good. And undocumented immigrants get welfare. Don't get welfare. All right? And undocumented immigrants tend to commit more crimes or less crimes than U.S.-born citizens. Or no, than legal immigrants or than than U.S. citizens. Undocumented immigrants tend to commit more crimes, tend to commit fewer crimes. All right? Very good. Interesting. Immigrants today learn English learn English and assimilate at a greater rate or a slower rate than immigrants in past generations. Immigrants today, not just undocumented immigrants, but immigrants in general, tend to assimilate and learn English at a faster rate or a slower rate. Faster? Slower. All right, great. If immigrants were to just follow the law, they could come here legally. If immigrants were to follow the law, the immigration laws of the United States, they could come here legally, and they wouldn't have to be here illegally. True. False. All right. All right. Most immigrants, foreign-born people in the United States today, or most, let's talk about people who came in the United States since 1990. Most immigrants in the United States who came since 1990 are undocumented or illegal. True. Most are legal. All right, let's try that again. Most are undocumented or illegal. Most are legal. All right. All right, this is going to be, we're going to have a multiple choice on this one. What percentage of the United States population today are immigrants, were born outside the United States? 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%. Okay? Or closer to which of these numbers? Okay? All right, so what percentage of people in the United States today were born in another country, are immigrants to the United States? Closer to 5%, closer to 10%, closer to 15%, closer to 20%, closer to 25%, more than 25%. All right. What percentage of people living in the United States today are undocumented immigrants, illegal immigrants? We're going to go by 1% this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, we're getting a lot of exercise here, 8%, 9%, 10%. All right, I think some people have been studying up here. All right, what percentage of the American workforce, what percent of the American workforce, people who go to work, okay, not too young to work, not retired, not too old to work, not disabled, etc. What percentage of the American workforce is foreign-born, are immigrants to the United States, not born in the United States? 5%, 10%, etc., etc. 5%, 10%, 20%, no, 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, 25, more than 25. Okay, what percent of the American workforce, people going to work on a regular basis, are undocumented immigrants, people who don't have papers, people not permitted to be here, not permitted to work here, nevertheless here and working, illegal immigrants? 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%. I think a lot of people have been studying before they came here. All right, very good. All right, so let's do some of these. Being here without permission, as I said, is a violation of United States federal law. However, it is not a crime. Parking where you're not supposed to is a violation of Greenwich public ordinances, but it's not a crime. It's a civil violation. What is the difference between a crime and a civil violation? A crime, there's a possible sentence of going to jail. A civil violation, if the judge wants to throw the book at you, the whole book at you, the judge cannot send you to jail. The worst they can do is fine you. Okay? Civil penalty, crime. Being here without permission, You can be fined. You cannot be sent to jail. However, there's another consequence of being here without permission, which is you can be deported. But the purpose of deportation is not to punish you. It is to remedy a situation. The situation is you're not supposed to be here. Part of the remedy of parking where you're not supposed to is to have your car towed. It feels like you're being punished, but the purpose is not to punish you. The purpose is to remedy a car being where it's not supposed to. So your car is being deported. Working here without permission, again, is a violation of United States federal law, but it is not a crime. It is a civil violation. Crossing the border, however, is a crime. It's a misdemeanor. It's one of the very lowest misdemeanors that exist on the federal criminal statutes. It's, sort of the equivalent of state statute against littering. Except for littering is a civil. So, I guess like screaming in the streets, public disturbance or something. Okay, do immigrants pay income taxes? Let me see now. I guess I'm going to be talking about that later in there. But yes, undocumented immigrants pay income taxes. Obviously, they pay property taxes, even if they're renting, because the landlord is using that rent to pay property taxes. They pay sales taxes every time they buy something. Undocumented immigrants cannot get welfare. If they do get welfare, the social worker giving them welfare will go to jail, and the immigrant will go to jail. They are not getting welfare. They're committing crime at much lower rates than native-born U.S. citizens. They are learning English at the same rate as prior groups. There are 100 years ago, there were complaints about the Southern Europeans and the Eastern Europeans who were coming here between 1880 and 1920. In 1920, the United States shut the door to immigration to Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans. And if you look at Henry Ford's newspaper at that time and the complaints about all those gosh darn Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans and how they were diluting the stock of the Northwestern Europeans, you'll see complaints in his newspaper and in other media about large neighborhoods in New York and in other major cities where block upon block you would see signs in Polish and in Italian and in Yiddish and in foreign languages, and you would see newspapers in those languages, and you wouldn't see anything in English. And they would say, these gosh darn people, they're not assimilating, they're not learning English, etc. And you hear the same complaints today. And in fact, the children of these immigrants are speaking perfect English, and many of those. And if you go to English as a second language classes in Stanford, it's standing room only. If you go to Danbury, it's standing room only, and they are struggling to learn English just like every group prior to the current group. As far as can they come here legally, we're going to be talking about that later on in the talk. What percentage of them are legal, we're going to be talking about that as well. Okay, in Connecticut, and the statistics we're going to be going over in just a moment are pretty similar to the rest of the country. First of all, the population of Connecticut is, I'm going to say, 3.6 million, 3,600,000. Now, let's talk about the statistics, the way I'm going to be presenting statistics. In fact, the census indicates there were 3,590,000 people living in the state of Connecticut in 2013. But I'm going to say there were 3.6 million. I'm just going to be rounding things out, otherwise we're going to go crazy. And I'm not going to say in 2013. I'm going to say there are 3.6 million people, and in all the statistics, I'm going to be fudging it up or down a couple percentage points. So let's not go crazy about that. And if we get nitpicky, we're going to be here all day. So there are today 3.6 million people living in the state of Connecticut. 1 in 7 of them are immigrants. And when I say immigrants, I'm talking about people who were born outside the United States. Half of those immigrants are United States citizens. They have naturalized. They've gone through the process. First they got their green cards. They waited 3 to 5 years or longer. They learned English to a certain level of competency. speaking, understanding, reading, writing. They learned a certain level of competency of U.S. civics beyond most high school students in the United States, I might add. They swore allegiance to the United States, which most U.S.-born citizens have not, unless you served in the government or in the military. And they became naturalized United States citizens. They swore allegiance to the United States, so half of them are naturalized United States citizens, and 1 out of 4 of these foreign-born immigrants are undocumented immigrants. So in Connecticut, of the 3.6 million residents of the state of Connecticut, there are 500,000 foreign-born people. Half of them are naturalized citizens. 130,000 of them are undocumented immigrants. That's the approximate population of Stamford or New Haven or Hartford. So we have the approximate equivalent population of any one of our major cities in Stamford of undocumented immigrants. You could just empty out New Haven and fill it with all the undocumented immigrants living in the state of Connecticut. Or you could do the same thing with Stamford or Bridgeport, approximately. And the rest of them are people who are here who have green cards or otherwise are here on work visas or student visas or in some other legal status. In 1990, 8.5% of the population of Connecticut were foreign-born people, immigrants. Today, 15% of the state of Connecticut are foreign-born, and these statistics are very similar to the rest of the country. 17% of Connecticut's workforce are foreign-born, are immigrants. And again, approximately half are United States citizens, naturalized. They've gone through the entire process. Undocumented immigrants, the illegal immigrants, 5% of our workforce. Housing values. It's estimated that immigrants to Fairfield County, by their presence, by their economic activity, have raised the value of the average home in Fairfield County by $3,800. New businesses in the state of Connecticut between in the 4 years, 2006 to 2010, created or started 31,000 businesses in the state of Connecticut. By the way, I'm happy to provide my sources for all this information if anyone wants to email me after the talk. The net income of these 31,000 businesses, the net income was $2.1 billion, which is the equivalent of 15% of the net income of all Connecticut businesses. If the 130,000 undocumented immigrants living in Connecticut were to disappear, it's actually a very funny movie that came out about 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember what it's called. I think something like If the Mexicans Were to Disappear. And it's available at Stanford Library. It might be available here at the Greenwich Library. And it starts out in Southern California. A cloud descends. And when it comes back up, all of the Mexicans are gone. All of the Mexican immigrants are gone. So all the nannies are gone. All the people cleaning houses are gone. All of the gardeners are gone. All of the help is gone. And it talks about what life is like suddenly after they're gone. So here's some statistics as to what life would be like in Connecticut, or economically, what it would be like in Connecticut. If the 130,000 undocumented illegal immigrants were to disappear from Connecticut, 5% of the workforce gone, $5.6 billion of economic activity gone, $2.5 billion of gross state product gone, 24,000 jobs gone, that's jobs created by their economic activity, $136 million worth of state and local taxes including $67 million of sales tax, $15 million worth of personal income taxes. This is undocumented immigrants. And $52 million worth of property taxes. Out of every, and we sort of went over this earlier, and I'm just going to present this particular fact in a different way. Of every 100 immigrants in Connecticut, that's foreign-born people, not just undocumented, 50 of them are naturalized U.S. citizens, 25 of them are undocumented immigrants, people who are not supposed to be here, not supposed to be working here, and 25 of them either have green cards or are otherwise present with a work visa or some other legal way. There are in Connecticut 10,000, approximately, 10,000 foreign students studying at our various colleges. They pay, or they bring in, $375 million worth of money in the form of tuition, room, and board, and other economic activity. So, sanctuary cities. How many people here have heard of the term sanctuary cities? All right. So, back in the 1980s, during the various civil wars in various Central American countries, there were churches in various parts of the country that called themselves sanctuaries, and they said, okay, we're going to permit Central Americans who have escaped the horrors of Central America to come to our churches, and we're not going to permit immigration to come and pick them up here. And there's a lot of confusion now about cities and counties and states that may have created or that are now called sanctuary cities or sanctuary areas. And I just wanted to, and this was in the news just recently, so I wanted to mention it very briefly. The federal government, immigration law is federal law, and the states, the counties, and the localities have absolutely no power with respect to passing immigration laws, enforcing immigration laws, deporting people, or preventing the federal government from enforcing those laws. And any city, and people have this idea that, a city, in the news, that a city can stop the federal government from coming in and deporting people. This is absolutely not the case. What is happening is that some cities, approximately 10 years ago when Congress passed a law permitting, it's been a little while, so I'm a little bit rusty on it, but essentially it permitted immigration to share information with local law enforcement and essentially deputize local police and state police to access information about people's immigration status and to detain people who were undocumented until immigration agents could pick them up and take them to deportation court, or if they already had deportation orders, to deport them. And a lot of communities across the country decided this was a horrible idea because it undercuts the entire purpose of public safety. Think about it for a minute. If I'm a police officer and there is an immigrant here who is a witness to a crime, do I want that immigrant to be afraid of local police to come forward as a witness and say, I know who the criminal is? Do I want that immigrant to be afraid that I am going to be deputized as an immigration officer and pick him up and all his friends because they're undocumented? Or do I want immigrants in my community to trust the police and come forward as witnesses, as victims, and to cooperate with local police and say immigration law is federal issue and let them pick up people? Crime and public safety is the role of police, and not picking people up just because they're here without permission and they're cutting a lot of grass and they're taking care of a lot of children, being nannies and taking care of a lot of elderly people because they need to be taken care of. So sanctuary cities is the story of places like New Haven that decided that the job of police is not to go after landscapers and nannies. The job of police is to go after criminals and leave the job of going after nannies and landscapers to immigration. And the only time local police should be involved with going after an immigrant is if they committed a crime. And as we pointed out earlier, being here without permission is not a crime, it's a civil violation. And cutting grass and taking care of children is not a crime. It's, if you are here without permission, a civil violation. I wanted to talk about now the problem with why it is that we have 11 million people, why we have 11 million people who are here illegally in undocumented status, why they're not legally here, and why it is that, for all practical purposes, 98% of them have no way to legalize. No way to legalize. So we have visas to come work here. And basically there's two categories of visas to come work here. We have high-tech visas for engineers and computer scientists and doctors and the rest of it. And it bounces up and down, and I don't do this area of the law, but it's something like 60,000 or 100,000 or 110,000. And arguably, we need many more than that. And each one of those people who comes in creates 4 jobs like instantaneously. But there's restrictions on how many of those that come in. And then we have 5,000 unskilled jobs, and these 5,000 jobs are for people picking tomatoes and working on hotels, seasonal jobs like hotels on Cape Cod that are closed for several months every year. And other than that, there are no visas for people to come in to cut grass and be nannies and the rest of it. So we have all these jobs that are available. We don't have people to fill those jobs. Someone comes here, they get a job as a nanny, and then there's 6 other families that need a nanny, and this nanny calls home and says, hey, I know these other families who need nannies, and then a cousin comes in and calls somebody else and says somebody else needs a nanny, and the same thing happens with landscapers, etc. And since there's no way for people to come in legally to do that, they're coming in over the border, or they're coming in with a visa, a visitor visa, a tourist visa, and then they're staying longer than they're supposed to. By the way, let's do another true-false. Of the 11 million undocumented people living here today, the 130,000 in Connecticut who are undocumented here today, most of them came in over the border, or most of them came with a visa and stayed longer than they were supposed to. Most of them came over the border? Okay, all right, let's all raise our hands. We've all fallen asleep here. Clearly, I've a very soporific effect on people, and I hear some people snoring there. Okay, most people came over most of the undocumented immigrants in Connecticut came in over the border. Most of them came with a visa and stayed longer than they were supposed to. Okay, it's actually, as it is across the country, about half and half. Yes. Okay, and it's very demographic. You see, from the poor countries, it's mostly over the border, and from the wealthier poor countries, the South American countries, they're mostly coming in with visas, and from the poorer countries, Central America, they're coming in over the border, and from Mexico, it's sort of a little bit in between, but because it's so close, it's coming in over the border. Lost my train of thought here. So there's no way for them to come in legally. There is, so we're talking about work visas, and I should distinguish, when we talk about visas basically come in 3 categories. There's about 75 different kinds of visas. There's the A1, the A2, the B1, the B2, the H1A, the H2B, et cetera, and they go up to V. They haven't gotten to W yet. But basically, all of these visas essentially fall into 3 categories. You come here to visit and leave, you come here to study and leave, or you come here to work and leave. And we just talked about the work one. And there's a couple other work ones. There's you come to transfer as a Toyota engineer, but then you leave. But the H one is the one I was really talking about. And for all practical purposes, for the nanny, et cetera, there's no way to do that. There is a green card path, and the green card is for people to come here and stay. And basically, there's two main ways to get green cards. There's through your family. You have a qualifying family member, a citizen, or a green card holder who can petition you, sponsor you, who can petition you. And those are very limited. A green card holder can only petition a spouse or an unmarried child. A citizen can petition a spouse, an unmarried child, a married child, a parent, or a sibling. But that takes many, many, many years. But if I don't have one of those categories, or if my wife is in the United States and she is a resident, she's a green card holder, a resident, same thing, legal permanent resident, it's going to take me several years before I can join her in the United States. We're going to be separated. Historically, it's been 4, 5, 6 years for me to join her. How many people here, are going to wait, if we have children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there's following the law, and then there's following your heart. That's a tough choice. 5 years separated with young children. And she came legally. She's got a green card. There's just, for whatever reason, I was unable to join her or whatever. Anyway, the other way to get a green card is through work. But through work, it takes 5 and 10 years as well. So here you have a landscaping company that needs workers now. It takes them 5 to 10 years to get those workers, and they have to identify those workers today. So here's a landscaping company in Greenwich. They have to figure out they need Jose Gomez in Guatemala. They need a guy today. They have to somehow know someone by the name of Jose Gomez in Guatemala today. How they know him, because he's in Guatemala. And they have to start the papers today and wait 5 to 10 years to get him here. Well, how do they know Jose Gomez in the first place? Maybe Jose's brother Angel is working there now, and he says, my brother Jose is great. Why don't you start papers for him? But they never met Jose. They haven't interviewed him. They haven't seen him on the job. It's just not practical. There's really no way to bring in a landscaper legally to work in the United States. So we have 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States today because there's no way for them to come in legally, and our economy is sucking them in because these jobs are here and because there's no jobs over there. And there's a whole big story about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Prior to those treaties having passed, there were studies showing that when they passed and cheap, subsidized American agricultural products, corn and wheat, there were studies showing prior to those agreements being passed that when our agricultural products went sweeping into those countries, undercutting the prices of the small farmers in those countries growing their corn, that those farmers would go bankrupt, they would lose their income, and they would have to come here to be able to support their families. So we sort of created some of the economic conditions for them to come to the United States. We created some of the push. But anyway, that's another story. So we have 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. Let's talk about how can they legalize. We talked about getting green cards. The way you get legalized is basically you get a green card, you get it through family, you get it through work. And the problem is that for most of those people, for 90% of them, if you came in with a visa and you stayed longer than you were supposed to, you got a small shot at it. If you are under the age of 21 and you have a parent who's a citizen, if you are the parent of a citizen and that citizen is over the age of 21, or if you are married to a citizen. Outside of those three categories, you're pretty much out. If you crossed over the border, you're pretty much out. Because in any of the other categories, that family member can start the petition for you. You have to wait X number of years, 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, and in some cases 21 years before you can actually do the second step of the process, which is what legalizes you. And when it's time to do the second step of the process, you have to leave the United States and go back to the U.S. consulate in your home country, back to Paris, to London, to Bogota, to Lima. And then there's another law that says if you've been here for more than a year illegally and you leave, you can't come back for 10 years. So let's put it together. There's this law from the 1950s that says for most categories of people, to legalize, first of all, you have to have this family member, and most of them don't, okay? To legalize, you have to start the process and wait, and then you have to leave. And then there's this other law from 1996. That was when Newt Gingrich was in charge of things down there. There's this other law in 1996 that says once you leave, you can't come back. So you kind of got a vicious circle there. For most people, and there's a few categories. Once they leave, they can ask for a pardon to come back. But for most people, to get a green card, you have to leave. If you leave, you can't come back. So basically, there's no way you can ever legalize. So we got laws that make it impossible for people to come legally, and we got other laws that make it impossible for them to ever legalize. So how many people remember 2.5 years ago, summer of 2014, the Gang of Eight in Congress, Marco Rubio was one of them, saying we need to do immigration reform, we need to fix this broken situation? Yes? No? I see some, right? Okay. What they said was, and this was actually what John McCain and Ted Kennedy wanted to do back in 2006, and then again a couple times after that. This idea keeps coming up, and it seems to me so reasonable. They say, the people who are here, they've broken the law. Not a criminal law. Well, the ones who crossed the border, they broke that. They did that little misdemeanor of breaking the law, but other than that, the ones who overstayed, and then after they crossed the border, all of them, they've been here without permission, civil violation. They worked here without permission, civil violation. The ones who crossed the border did that, misdemeanor, etc. They broke the law. You break the law, you have to have a consequence. You park where you're not supposed to, there has to be a consequence, $25 fine, etc. So we should, but the problem with immigration is, you're here without permission. Even if you pay a fine, you're still here without permission. There's no way to pay your debt to society and move on without being deported. But after you've been here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you have kids, you've made your life here, being deported is, not so much a remedy as exile. It's cruel and unusual punishment. You're contributing to our society. If you haven't committed a crime, your positive effect, we just talked about the economics. So what they talked about was this solution. You did the crime, you're going to do your time, and what they said is, we're going to create 2 $1,000 penalties. We're going to give you a green card. You're going to have to pay these penalties, but you're going to have to wait a lot longer for the green card than you normally would. Everybody who is in line to get a green card now, you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to go at the very back of the line. You're going to have to pay the penalties, and you're going to have to wait till everybody else gets a green card. They even talked about having like a pre-green card blue card. And then they were going to have to wait much longer than the normal period of time before they could get citizenship. Normally you get a green card. You wait 3 or 5 years, depending on whether you're married. If you're married to a citizen, you wait 3 years. You can apply for citizenship. If you speak English, you read English, and you pass the civics test. Most people wait 5 years. These people are going to have to wait much longer to get their citizenship. So they were going to do 2 things. They were going to permit people to pay their debt to society and then legalize themselves. And there were going to be some sort of provisions to create work visas to permit people to come here to do the jobs that our economy needs done. And every time this is proposed, it gets like right up to the edge, and then it dies, and then the next time it gets right up to the edge a little further, and then dies, and it keeps on dying. And the demographics of the United States changes, and the immigrant population gets bigger and bigger, and each time the vote seems to move a couple notches further in the national elections. One thing I notice in my personal life is, when I was growing up, immigrants in the Stanford public schools were one or two Italian kids who just got over and didn't speak English, and one Puerto Rican kid. And for my kids, their best friends are Guatemalans and Peruvians and Colombians. So immigrants aren't these exotic, strange people with unusual food and accents and attitudes. They're their best friends. So there isn't this anti-immigrant feeling that my kids have, or uncomfortable feeling that my kids have. And I think that's sort of the attitude of the new generation coming up, and it's just going to become a non-issue. And it's becoming a non-issue as time passes. So we're going to have a solution, and I personally would like to see a humane solution sooner rather than later, because we just have a terrible situation now. It's wrong, and it needs to be fixed. So I don't know how much time we have. I'm open to doing questions.
I think we'll go to questions.
You have a question?
Just to add to your lecture, what chance does a person have who escaped from Iran, and through Turkey, did the perilous journey through the Aegean Sea, is now in Greece? Does this person have any chance of getting to the United States?
Of course, it's a land journey from that whole area, Central Asia and the Middle East, to Europe, as it is from South America and Central America to the United States. It's not a land journey from those areas to the United States. For those people to come to the United States, they either have to have phenomenal means to come here illegally, to get themselves to Mexico, or less likely to Canada, and then cross the border. And to come here legally, the path would be through refugee status. And as many people have probably heard, to come to the United States as a refugee is just a phenomenal process. You have to go through several screenings. You go through screenings through the UN, 1 or 2 or 3 screenings through the UN. You go through screenings through U.S. immigration. You get screened by United States intelligence. You just get screened left, right, and center. And, as I'm sure people have heard in the news, if you're a terrorist, that's about the slowest way you could possibly, and most dangerous way you could come to the United States. It'd be far easier to come here as a student, as most terrorists have come to the United States. And in fact, the 9/11 terrorists did come with student visas.
What do you think the chances are of English becoming the official language, and what are the chances of that being a requirement for citizenship?
In the United States, English is a requirement for citizenship in the United States. There is today a requirement that, when you walk into your citizenship exam today, the examiner stands there with their hands behind their back and with no body language whatsoever says, "Please remain standing and raise your right hand." And if the immigrant smiles and says, "Yes, yes, yes," they're out the door. Seriously. And they say, "We'll reschedule you in 3 weeks." There's no nicey-nicey stuff about that. And then they speak and you have to speak and understand, and then they give you a phrase, and they say, please, they give you a written phrase, and they say, please explain what that phrase says. And then they give you a pen and paper, and they read a phrase to you, and they say, please write that phrase down, and if you don't write it down correctly, you flunked the test. So English is the official language, and you have to read, write, speak, and understand it at a certain level to be able to pass the citizenship test. But I think perhaps the question behind your question is, is the United States becoming a polyglot country? And I think that complaint has been repeated ever since Benjamin Franklin complained about the gosh darn Germans in Pennsylvania refusing to learn English. And actually, if you go to certain parts of Pennsylvania today, and in certain communities, you'll hear the exact same complaint today.
You have described federal regulations that are completely contradictory and dysfunctional.
Completely.
You have described federal regulations that are contradictory and dysfunctional, and administrative procedures that are so arduous that anyone coming to the country is encouraged to work around them and get here as best he or she can. Is this the will of the people? How did it get this way? And what is the underlying reason that this is the approach that we're taking?
Well, just very briefly, it's the statutes that make the mess, and then the regulations implement these messy statutes. And one of the things Obama has done is actually changed some of the regulations and changed the procedures, which are even below the regulations, as to how the regulations are implemented. But, it's the people who elect the representatives and the representatives who pass the statutes, and the people elected the Congress that passed some of the very worst laws in 1996, including the law that says if you leave to pick up your green card at the consulate, you can't come back. So your question as to whether it was the will of the people, that's a philosophical question. The executive branch, the president, can only do so much at softening the way the law is implemented. How many people here are aware that the president in 2012 said, I am not going to deport young people who came to the United States prior to 2007 and prior to the age of 16. Do you remember that? Okay. So basically what the president is saying is very much like a chief of police in Greenwich is saying, the law says that if you go over 25 miles an hour on X road, you're violating the law, and we're supposed to give you a ticket. But you know what? Almost no one ever uses that road, and it's a very long road. And if people go under 30 miles an hour, if they go over 25 but under 30, I refuse to give them tickets. That's essentially what Obama said. So the city council of Greenwich said speed limit is 25, and the chief of police, the person, or the mayor, ordered the chief of police, Obama ordered the Immigration Service, to not enforce that part of that law in that situation because the mayor, Obama, the president, decided that was inhumane. And that's the prerogative of the person enforcing the law. You can't say, gosh darn it, Mayor, I don't believe you can say, gosh darn it, Mr. Mayor, we're going to kick you out of office because you're not giving tickets to people who are going between 25 and 30 miles an hour on this section of this road. The mayor can make that decision. I suppose you could vote him out of office, but you can't, what's it called? What did they try to do to Clinton? You can't impeach, or it's silly to impeach. It's ridiculous to impeach. That's what's within the executive's powers to decide how they are going to impose the law, how they're going to enforce the law. So I hope I answered your question.
Mr. Burns, thank you very much for a talk that illustrated the sort of catch-22 situation that these 11 million people are in. You proposed earlier a program by which they would be allowed to come in legally. Does that need to be made politically?
I think I can answer your question. So, at the consulate, we can sort of imagine it as two lines. It's not really quite accurate to put it this way. There's a line for green cards through family and employment, and it's not quite accurate to talk about it as a line for work, student, and visitor visas, but we'll go ahead and, for purposes of simplicity, to put it that way. And then we can talk about people crossing the border and people coming here and staying on visas and then staying when they're not supposed to. So people crossing the border and coming on visas and staying longer than they're supposed to, they're not replacing anybody who is coming here, in quotes, legally. They're not jumping ahead in line. They're not getting any advantages over these people who are, as you put it, coming here legally. Point number one. Point number two. The people who are coming here, I'll use the term you used or implied, legally. The ones who are in the family line, first of all, they are the few and fortunate who qualify that they have a family member. And as I pointed out earlier, they are waiting, in most cases, many, many, many years of separation. Husband from wives, children from parents, etc. And again, they're not being prejudiced by these line jumpers, as you're calling them, but they're not really, they're not jumping lines. The people who are not really waiting in line for work green cards, there isn't really a line. There is a line for work green cards, but it's not really at the consulate. But remember, Jose Gomez back in Guatemala, who wants to come work here as a landscaper, doesn't know how to contact Joe Smith, the landscaper company in Greenwich. And Joe Smith, the landscaper company in Greenwich, doesn't know how to contact anybody in Guatemala. They don't know how to even get in touch with each other to start the process of 5 or 10 years to bring them here. It's just a not workable situation. I mean, there's no classified ads and no way to interview or check each other's bona fides and qualifications, and no way for Jose to check out John to see if he wants to work for John, or John to see if he wants Jose to work for him. I mean, it's just, it's like this system that works in the air that is impracticable. And as far as the people coming here for the visas, and remember, visas are, you're coming here to visit and leave, to study and leave, or to work and leave. Okay, so you got the green cards, and then you got the visas, okay? And remember the work visas, there's only 60 or 110,000, I never know, but there's not enough. There's the high-tech visas, and there's not enough of them, okay? And then there's 5,000 for the landscapers and really, there's 5,000 for picking tomatoes in California, picking tomatoes and lettuce in California, and to work on the hotels in Cape Cod. There's none for the landscapers. There's none for the nannies. There's none for the restaurant cooks. There's none for all these other jobs. So no one's jumping any lines because there's no line. There's no way to get in line. There's no booth at the consulate that says if you want to work as a landscaper, stand at this line, that people are jumping. You can't get those jobs. There's no visas for those jobs, and that's the problem. That's what John McCain wanted to fix. That's what Ted Kennedy wanted to fix. That's what Marco Rubio wanted to fix till he ran for cover. At a certain point, that's what the other senators really wanted to fix and stayed and fought for.
What is the total cost in terms of benefits for an immigrant? These people need to be fed and housed and clothed and educated and whatever. What is the total cost of all those benefits?
Undocumented immigrants. The 11 million nationwide, the 130,000 in Connecticut, the approximate equivalent of population of Stamford or Bridgeport or Hartford or New Haven. are not entitled to any benefits. If they get a benefit, they will go to jail, and the social worker who gave them the benefit will go to jail. They work for their bread, and if they don't, they starve. So I don't think there's any cost to them, and in fact, they are, I guess the calculation would be 100% contribution to the economic, because they work, and every penny that they don't send back to their country, they spend. And as far as benefits to other immigrants, there are very strict restrictions once you get a green card, which is, and when you come here legally, when you legalize, the few who can legalize, they get a green card, or the ones who come in legally, they get a green card. You're essentially entitled to almost no benefits at all the first X number of years. I think it's 5 years. So I think the cost during the first 5 years is little or nothing. Also, whoever sponsored them, whoever petitioned them, the citizen or green card holder who petitioned them, when you petition them, you have to sign something called an affidavit of support. It's essentially a contract between the citizen or resident, sponsoring citizen or resident, and the government that says, if this immigrant at any time collects welfare or any other public benefit from the federal government, state government, or local government, that governmental entity can reach right into my paycheck, my bank account, or my property and reimburse itself. So, you're signing basically a lien that until this immigrant becomes a citizen, or otherwise has worked 40 quarters, 10 years, without receiving any sort of benefit at all, that if they receive any benefit, the citizen or resident will reimburse any benefit, public assistance benefit that this immigrant receives.
In your experience, sir, what is the current market on a complete list of illegal documents which would be acceptable to an employee such that he would probably suspect that these documents were illegal, but he would put them through anyway?
Firstly, in the state of Connecticut, undocumented immigrants can get driver's licenses. The state of Connecticut finally decided that it makes more sense to give people driver's licenses so we know who's driving on our roads, because that's a public safety issue. The state of Connecticut should not be involved in immigration issues. Let the federal government deal with that. So you don't need a fake driver's license in the state of Connecticut. And every year, another 1 or 2 states sees the light and says, if we give people driver's licenses, we will know who they are, they will register their cars, they will insure their cars, we will know who they are, we can find them if there's an accident, and that's good for public safety. So you don't need to get a fake driver's license in the state of Connecticut. I don't think you need it in New York, and each year there's more and more states that are saying we're sick and tired of waiting for the federal government to fix the situation. We're going to do that in the state of Connecticut. Number 2, a lot of immigrants are getting what's called a tax identification number from the IRS. So rather than get a Social Security card, which they do not qualify for because you need proof that you are here in the United States legally and eligible to work, anybody can get a tax ID number. You write to the IRS, you say, I have income in the United States. IRS doesn't care where the income comes from, they just want theirs. So the IRS will give you a number. It's like opening up an account with the IRS, and then you can pay your taxes. And a lot of employers who don't care too much about people's immigration status will accept that and will withdraw taxes based on that. As far as, when I first started practice 15 years ago, I saw fake work permits because they were pretty easy to fake, and I saw fake Social Security cards. And I think people were getting them on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn for $50. But I don't see that stuff anymore. I just don't. People are either working underground or they're using somebody else's Social Security number. And employers, are either accepting, they're not even asking for their documents, they're just throwing in whatever number, or people are paying for cash or whatever. So I'm not really seeing, and the documents these days, the green cards, the work permits, are really high-tech documents. You think a dollar bill looks like a high-tech document these days? The green cards and work permits are phenomenally high-technology documents.
Phil, thank you so much. A great presentation.